I'm going to ask all presenters to join me on stage. I think we have cards being distributed. If you'd like to ask a question of the panel, please just write it down on a card and collect it, bring it towards the front. While we wait for some of you to write things down, let me maybe get started with a question. And that is one thread that I saw running through the presentations is definitely Björn and Armando, is that some of these advances are enabled by gathering a lot of data about what students are doing. And I'm wondering if there's a flip side to that. Should there be a reasonable expectation about privacy in some settings of what you do online in an online course or in an online enhanced course? And where do you think that line might be?
Yeah, we ran straight up against this issue as soon as we started releasing software that would record students' progress. Instead of just having them submit at the end, we keep track of snapshots of everything they're doing along the way, which is an incredibly rich resource. But at the same time, some students said, I don't want you snooping around in my progress. I just want to submit something at the end. And our choice was easy. We just respected that and said, if you want to opt out of any sort of tracking, then that's fine. But students definitely brought it up, and I think we should be sensitive to it.
Yeah, I think we've run into the same thing because we have, in fact, done sort of field experiments, both in MOOCs and campus courses, on some of the technologies that I showed you in my panel slot. Like all universities, Berkeley has an institutional review board. Anytime that human subjects are going to be involved in an experiment or an intervention, we have to file a protocol. It's got to get reviewed. We have to go into quite rigorous level of detail about what we're going to do, what the risks are. I think there's a challenge area for them and for us who are doing research in this area is that a lot of the IRB protocols weren't necessarily designed around things like this. I mean, a lot of what we're doing is we're collecting a lot of data in the aggregate that will probably never need to be identified to an individual student, except at the moment where we want to give an individual student some feedback on their work. So I think we're in the process of navigating what the right balance is between, on the one hand, you want to be able to take advantage of opportunities to do something rapidly. You want to be able to do it within the timeline that you could still help the student in that same course, but at the same time, make sure that there's protocols that are safeguarding who gets to see that data, who gets to use it, what happens if you try to publish results about it. So I think we're sort of feeling our way forward. The Berkeley IRB has been very helpful. They're trying to work with us on it, and I think we'll learn as we go.
Let me pick up a question from the audience here. It's a question about scaling. So the question is, how can you scale courses which require lots of hardware? So think about various engineering disciplines. And let me maybe augment that question by asking what should and shouldn't scale. Because I think AltSchool has a different model that is on purpose focusing on micro schools, small schools.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing we don't want to scale is all the absorbent costs that come along with education. Back in 2007, when I was doing my grad work at Columbia, right across the river in Newark, the per pupil expenditures for the public school is $19,000. That's right on par with a lot of independent school, private school tuitions. Of course, in the public school model, it's 80% of what that money that comes in is all for administration and building and property. It's not forward-facing. In our model, and actually, in fact, most independent school models, 80% of the tuition revenue that comes in is actually for the teachers, the people at the front line. So for us, in order for it to scale, all of that money is built around the support system for the teacher. So technology is really just built to make sure that the teacher's job is more efficient and easier.
I would say that the other thing that shouldn't scale is when you're really working with organizations in real-world settings, because you can't assume that this setting is like that setting, that this clinic is like that, this hospital is like that. And so that's why the on-site application of skills needs to work within that organization. And that's not something that you can sort of test online. You have to just see people doing that. So that's why we do this sort of hybrid model of training and then assessment on-site.
Any thoughts about scaling with hardware?
I mean, I'll take a whack at it just because I was a hardware guy once upon a time, really, not so much anymore. But one of my colleagues here actually has been dealing with exactly this issue. He teaches a very popular lower division course in which students learn to build different basic kinds of analog circuits. And previously, one of the limiting factors of that course was you need an oscilloscope. And there's only so many oscilloscopes on campus, and there's only so many tables that hold them, and that was the limiting factor. They were able to work with a major electronics company to develop essentially a small smart protoboard that plugs into the USB port of a laptop, has soft instrument panels on the screen, and for I think something under $200 now, a student who's willing to invest in one of those can do substantially all of the work that previously would have required them to go into one of the fully equipped labs. Now, that's a point solution. I'm not saying that every course that has a hardware component has that possibility, but I think there's an opportunity to sort of rethink and refactor what the hardware needs actually are in terms of the fact that computers have become dirt cheap. I think there's also the possibility that there's a lot that can be done in simulation. There's a robotics and embedded systems course here that's gone a similar route. The students do have to build a physical robot that physically moves and physically does stuff, but they now have software that allows them to simulate it in a real 3D environment and understand how their embedded system controller is actually going to work. So they still do have a go to the lab and build something aspect, but they're at a much higher level of preparation when they actually enter the lab. So that mitigates the scale. I think it cuts down on the constant a little bit.
I think we have time to take one more question.
In a MOOC environment, how can the instructor's effectiveness be determined and assessed? Is this different than in a face-to-face?
You want to go first, or?
Sure. I mean, I feel like my role as an instructor in a course now is not about whether I lecture effectively in a hallway, in a classroom, but what experiences I design. So the instructors often are there in order to figure out what the assignments look like, what the automated feedback looks like, and what's the progression of a student through the body of material.
Yeah, I think I would generalize that a little bit to say that the instructors are providing more context than they are content. I think we're providing some editorial choices about what should be studied when, where the focus should be, and then we try to design a pathway through the material and exercises that are scaffolded and assessments that reflect what those judgments are. Now, to the extent that students do well or poorly on a set of assessments, and the question is to what extent does that reflect on the effectiveness of the instructor, I don't want to weasel out of the answer to that, but I don't think that the only thing being measured in that case is the effectiveness of the instructor. I think if the instructor fails to design useful assessments, I think it's easier to detect failure than it is to detect success in those cases. I wish I had a less weaselly answer, but I think the students, it's a combination of what the students are learning from each other as they do the assessments and the quality of the assessments and scaffolding that we put together.
Can maybe redirect that to Chris as well. To what extent is the technology that you said you build on the back end helping you administer the school and give feedback to the teachers?
Absolutely. I think it's a little bit of the technology as well as the balance of the processes to get there. So using technology to document and capture all that work. So it's not just based upon an assessment. And really, one another piece of data that we capture is we will look at net promoter scores from our families. Particularly, it's a little bit less assessment intensive in the K-8 environment. There will be in a university and college environment without a doubt. But certainly helping people understand where we're going and how we're getting kids there. And we have families, and we attract families who come and know that your third grader and your goals for your third grader are light years different than your third grader. So what happens on that assessment at the end of the day might not be reflective of the success of that child and their job of learning, and the teacher and their job of providing the environment for that learning to occur.
Great. Thank you. Join me in thanking our panelists.